Hi everybody, I'm the Ember, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make this gaming console in Blender. And don't worry if you're new to Blender, I'm going to make this tutorial pretty beginner friendly. Okay, so I've opened up Blender. This time we're actually going to save the default cube. Okay, so first I'm going to press S, X, and then scale it to somewhere around about this size. Maybe a bit thicker, something like this. And I'll scale it out on the Y-axis a bit, and on the Z-axis. Something like this should be fine. So at the moment you can see we can't really see this edge, and when I'm modeling I like to see all the edges. So to fix this, I'm going to go up to this drop down over here, go down to cavity and enable that. Now it just kind of shows all the edges a bit clearer. I'll go back to this drop down to cavity and change the type from screen to both. Now this is a lot easier to view. Before we go any further, I'm just going to delete this light. And now let's add the screen. So I'm going to press Shift A, Mesh, Cube, go into front view by clicking this X or numpad number 3, and I'll move this up a bit. Now just scale this to a nice square shape, probably something like this. That should be fine. And this cube is going to be the cutter, so it's going to cut a hole into our cube like this, and then we can put the screen on top of that hole. Hopefully that makes sense. So with our cube selected, I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode. Then I'm just going to press the / button, and this isolates the object. So if we press that, you can see it hides all the other objects. And I'm going to press 2 to go into edge select mode and select all these edges like this. Now I'm going to press Ctrl B to bevel those edges. And if we scroll our mouse wheel up, you can see that adds some more segments. So something like this should be fine. Now we can just left click to confirm. Now I'm going to press tab to go out of edit mode and / to unisolate that object. Now I'm going to go to front view by clicking 1 on your numpad or the Y button up here. And I'll just move this on the X axis, so GX, to somewhere around about here. And you can see this line here, that's going to be the depth of the screen. So something like that should be fine. Now we want to use this cube as a cutter for the main cube. So with our main cube selected, I'm going to go over to the modifiers and add a Boolean modifier. Then I'm going to select the eyedropper for the object and pick our cutter object. Now I can hide that object and you see we have a nice round cut. Now if we go up to the outliner, you can see our cube is hidden. If we click that eye, it will unhide it again, but we don't need to see it for the moment, so we can just hide it. And I'm also going to disable it in renders by clicking this camera icon. And I'll rename it to screen cutter. Okay. With our cube selected, I'm also going to rename that main body. Okay. Now I want to round these edges. So I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode, and we're still on edge select mode, so I'll select all these edges by holding down shift, and then press Ctrl B to bevel that. You can see the bevel is not really even. So to fix that, I'll just undo, press tab to go out of edit mode, Ctrl A and apply the scale. Now if we go back into edit mode and press Ctrl B, you can see it bevels it perfectly. So I'll make it maybe something like this. Scroll the mouse wheel up to add some more segments. This should be fine. Now I'm going to select both these faces. Now I'm going to go to face select mode and select the front face and hold shift and select the back face. Now I'll press Ctrl B to bevel that and scroll the mouse wheel down till we have no segments. And I'll do it something like that. Then we can press tab to go out of edit mode, and that is looking pretty nice. I'm also going to right click and shade auto smooth. Okay, so before we move on to the buttons, let's add the little bit of glass that pops out from the screen. So I'm going to unhide our screen cutter object, select that, press Shift D to duplicate it, and then go to the outliner and rehide the screen cutter object. Now I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode and select this front face. Then I'm going to press G and X and move that in to somewhere around about like this. Then we can press Ctrl B to bevel that. And I'm going to scroll the mouse wheel up. And something like this should be fine. I'll also move it out a little bit on the X. And then in front view, I'm just going to scale it down a tiny little bit. And then maybe I'll move it in a bit more. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I'm also going to select that, right click and shade smooth. And I'll select that and rename this screen glass. Then we can check the camera icon so it renders in the final render. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so let's add the buttons now. So first of all, I want to add that plus button. So to do that, I'm going to add a cube. And again, I'm going to press / to isolate all the objects except the one we have selected. Then I'm going to press SZ to scale it on the Z axis. And I'll maybe make it 0.3. That looks good. Now I'll tab into edit mode, select one of these faces, press E, and then type 2. Once you've done that, you can select the other face and press Shift R. Copies the last action you have done. So the last action I did was extruding it out by 2. So it's just going to copy that again. And there we go. So I'm going to select all these top edges, then I'm going to press GZ and move it up. Something like this should be fine. Now I'm going to press Ctrl A, apply scale, go over to the modifiers, and add a bevel modifier. And I'll maybe make the segments like 8. Then we can increase this to something we like. And then once you've done that, we can right click and shade smooth. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm going to press the / button again. And you can see it's actually like super giant. So let's scale this down. Move it out a bit. And let's rotate it. And then we can scale this and position this in a spot we like. So I think right here looks pretty good. And then we have some room for some other buttons over here. Okay, so now it's in the right spot. I'm going to go to front view again and move this back. That's looking pretty nice. But in real life, buttons don't just go straight into the object. They normally have a cutout around it that they go into. So to make this more realistic, I'm just going to duplicate the button, scale it up a bit, select our main body, add another boolean, and then I'll select that object. Then we can hide that object. If we look up close, you can see it cut out a hole. It's going to unhide that. I might just move it in a little bit. And to make this a bit easier to view, I'm just going to go to the object properties, viewport display, and make this wire. So now we can see what it looks like. Okay, that should be fine for the moment. Now just call this plus button cutter. And I'll name the actual one just plus button. There we go. Now we don't want this cutter object to show up in the render, so again I'm going to click the disable in renders button. Okay, so that's one button done. Now we want some more buttons over here. So I'm going to press Shift A and add a cylinder. And before we click anything else, I'm going to go down to this add cylinder panel and I'll make the vertices 64. Then I'll press the / button again to isolate this object. Now I'll press Tab to go into edit mode and make sure you're on edge select mode, then hold down Alt and select this top ring. Now I'll press Ctrl B and bevel that. Something like this should be good. Tab out of edit mode, right click and shade auto smooth. Press the / button again and I'm going to rotate this on the Y axis, so RX and then 90. Go into front view and I'll just scale this down. So maybe something like this. Go into side view and I'll just move this out a bit. Should be good. Now I'll duplicate that and put it over here. You can kind of position these buttons where you want, but I think something like this should be fine. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate that again. Go into front view, scale it up a bit, select our main body, go to modifiers, and again add another boolean. And then I'll select that cylinder. Now we can hide the cylinder and we have a nice cutout. But you can see it actually goes super deep, so I'm going to unhide it and I'll just move it forwards a bunch and then hide it again. And it might be a little bit too big, so I'll just scale it down a tiny bit. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this one. Duplicate it, scale it up a bit, select the main body, add another boolean, and select the cylinder. Then hide the cylinder. And go into side view and just move it forwards a bit. Okay, that should be good. I'll hide it again. And I'll call this button A. And this one button B. And then I'll press Alt H to unhide everything. We can rehide this screen cutter. And I'll select this button A cutter and I'll call it button A cutter. And I'll do the same thing with button B cutter. Now just to keep our outliner more organized, I'm going to make a new collection. And I'll call this buttons. And we can put our plus button and our button A and button B in there. And I'll also make another collection and call this cutters. And then I'll put all the cutters in there. And just make sure all the cutters are disabled in the render and the viewport. Okay, so now let's add the final two buttons on the side over here. So I'm going to add a cube, isolate the object again, and I'll scale this on the Z and scale it on the Y. Tab into edit mode, go to edge select mode, select these edges, Control B to bevel, and you can see it is beveling weird again. So tab out of edit mode, Control A, apply scale, go back into edit mode, Control B and bevel. Now I want it to be fully rounded at the ends, but it's hard to get perfect without it overlapping. So to fix that, I'll press C, and that just clamps the overlap. Scroll the mouse wheel up a bit, and that should be good. Now we actually do have a few overlapping vertices though. So I'll go to vertex select mode, press A to select everything, and M to merge, and then merge by distance. And you can see down here it removed 4 vertices. Now in face select mode, I'll select this top face, Control B, and bevel that a bit as well. Then I'll right click and shade auto smooth. There we go, we have a nice button. Now I'll / again, rotate this in front view by 90 degrees, and scale it down a bunch. And I'll go to side view and just position this somewhere you like. Then duplicate it, press Z so it's perfectly centered, and then something like that should be fine. I'll select both of those and just position them so they're just inside the console a little bit. Okay, I think this is good for the moment. You can go ahead and add heaps more buttons, and maybe you could add some text and stuff as well, but I think this is fine for me. And before I forget, I'll just rename these two buttons and call that side button A, and this one side button B. And then I'll put that in the buttons collection. Now let's add some materials to this. So I'm going to go up to the shading tab. Okay, so I'm going to select our main body, and for this I want a plastic material. So I'm just going to rename this plastic black. And I'm also just going to isolate this object. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to make it darker, a dark gray color, nearly black. Then I'll add a noise texture and a bump node. And I'll plug the factor of the noise into the height of the bump. Then I'll plug the bump's normal into the principled BSDF's normal. Now you can see that doesn't really look too good. You can see on the side it's stretched. So to fix this, I'll add a textured coordinate node and a mapping node. And I'll plug the mapping node into the vector of the noise texture, and I'll plug the object socket of the texture coordinate into the mapping node. You can see that is super bumpy, so I'll turn down the strength to something like 0.05. And then I'll just turn the scale of the noise to something like 15. And I'll also just change the detail of the noise up to 15. This might even be a bit too much bump, so I'll turn the strength to 0.01. Now it's just a really nice subtle detail. If you want to, you could make this metallic, or we can turn down the roughness a bit to make it a bit more shiny. I might do that. And maybe I'll make the strength 0.02. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's just something to break up the light here. Without this, it would just be completely smooth, and that's not really realistic. So now I'll press the / button again to unhide everything else. Now first of all, I'm going to select our glass screen protector bit, and I'll make a new material for that. Then I'll call this glass, and I'll just add a glass BSDF and plug that in. You won't be able to see the effect in Eevee, but if we change our render engine to cycles and our device to GPU compute, and then go to rendered view, and then click the drop down and disable scene lights and scene world, you can see it's actually working. It's kind of like bending everything else though. So a better way to do this is add a principled BSDF node, plug that in, go down to transmission, turn the weight all the way up, and turn the roughness down to like 0.05. Now let's select our plus button, and I'll select the plastic material, and I'll press the number 2 to make this separate. And if we didn't do that, when we change the color, it'll change the color of the body as well. And we don't want that, so I'll click the 2. Now I'll make this a bit brighter, and maybe make it like a red color. Maybe actually a bright orange might look pretty nice. Yeah, the orange looks nice. Maybe I'll make all the buttons the orange. Yeah, that looks pretty nice. Now for the like screen image, I'm just going to hide the screen glass by pressing H. So I'm going to tab into edit mode, but you see those faces that have been booleaned, we can't change in edit mode because it's still a modifier. So I'm going to go over to the modifier stack, and I'll just collapse these booleans. And the first boolean is the screen. So I'll click that and apply it. Now if we tab into edit mode, you can see we have the face there. And that's what I want. So I'm going to make a new slot and assign that material. You can use whatever image you want, but I'm just going to use my channel logo. So I'll just drag that in. But before we do that, we need to make a new material. And then I'll drag it in. And it's just an image like that. And we can plug this into the base color. And you can see it's way too big. And with the image selected, I'll press Ctrl T. If that doesn't work for you, you can just add the mapping and the coordinate node manually. And then I'll just scale this down. And then I'll just position this so it shows the full logo. Okay, so I've positioned it to a spot I like. Now to make it glow, I'm going to open the emission tab, drag the color of the logo into the color of the emission. Now I can make that like 5, maybe that's a bit too much, 2. And if we turn off the scene worlds and scene lights, you can see it is glowing. And if we unhide the glass, you can see it is kind of weird warping effect. To fix that, I'll just add a solidify modifier. And that does help a lot. That's looking pretty good. Now let's just go back to our layout and set this up for a quick render. So I'll select everything, press R, Y 90. So it's flat. And I'll just move it up so it's kind of sitting on the floor. And I'll add a plane, scale that up. Go into the camera. And I'll just position this in a spot I like. You can press Shift tilde key. The tilde key is just above the tab key. And that allows you to control this like a game with WASD. And I'll just position this in a spot I like. This looks pretty nice. Just make sure it's sitting flush on the floor. Then I'm going to go to rendered view. I'm going to make the world fully black and then Shift A and add a area light. I'll move that up, scale it up, make the value something like 500. And then I'll just position this off to the side. Press R twice to trackball rotation this. And then position it something like that. And I'll do the same from the other side. But make it a bit less, like 200. We can give it a tint of blue as well. I'll give the other one a tint of purple. Maybe I'll make this one a tint of orange actually. Yeah, that looks pretty good. You can't really see the bump on these bright buttons. So I'll go back to shading and I'll make the bump 0.05. And go back to the layout. Still can't see much. So maybe I'll make it 0.1. Go back to our layout. And that should be fine. Maybe I will make the bump a bit more on the black material as well. 0.05 should be fine. Okay, so now maybe I'll just make these colors a little bit more intense. Then I'm going to go to render properties, down to color management, make this high contrast, and I'll make the view transform filmic. And then I'll go up to compositing, click use nodes, and add a glare node. And I'll make this fog glow. Now if we go back to our layout, go to this drop down up here, and enable the compositor to always, and then we turn up the emission strength on our screen to something like 10, you can see it glows. Okay, so that's actually pretty nice. So now all we have to do is go up to render and render image. If you enjoyed making this and want more content similar to this, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.